Jess and I had been together for about 4 years, and everything seemed to be going fine until we hit a rough patch. A couple of years into our relationship, we adopted Max, a golden retriever. Honestly, Max became the light of my life. I walked him, fed him, trained him, you name it, I was the one doing it. Jess liked having a dog in theory, but the reality of taking care of him wasn't her thing. She'd cuddle him now and then, but I was the one raising Max. So, when Jess and I broke up, I thought it would be a no-brainer that I'd keep him. Boy, was I wrong. Out of nowhere, Jess told me she wanted full custody of Max. I was floored. Felt like a cruel joke. She barely interacted with Max, and now she wanted to take him from me? Couldn't wrap my head around it. I tried to reason with her, even suggesting joint custody just to keep the peace. But Jess wasn't having it. She told me that if I didn't agree to let her have Max, she'd take me to court. I couldn't believe she was serious. But the more we talked, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a threat. It was her plan. I was furious, but I wasn't about to lose Max without a fight. So, I got a lawyer, determined to keep my dog, and that's when things started getting really messy. Jess wasn't the woman I thought I knew, and as the legal battle loomed, I realized this fight over Max was going to expose just how far she was willing to go. After that initial shock, I was determined not to let Jess walk all over me. I mean, Max wasn't just some shared asset. He was family. The next day, I met with my lawyer, a no-nonsense guy named Mark. After I explained everything, he assured me we had a strong case since I was the primary caregiver for Max. I did all the work, vet appointments, training, feeding, everything. He also mentioned that courts typically look at who's been the primary caretaker, so I was feeling hopeful. Meanwhile, Jess wasn't letting up. She sent me text after text, insisting Max belonged with her. Her reasoning? She claimed that since she was the one who technically adopted Max with me, he was equally hers. I wasn't buying it. Jess had barely lifted a finger for Max, but now she was treating him like a prize to be won in our breakup. What really threw me off, though, was how quickly Jess started talking to her friends and posting on social media about losing her dog. She made it seem like I was ripping Max out of her life, painting me as the bad guy. Couldn't believe it. It was like she was trying to sway public opinion before we even went to court. The drama was building, and I could tell Jess was getting more spiteful as the days went on. Then, out of nowhere, Jess hit me with a surprise. She'd hired a high-powered attorney known for winning ugly custody battles. I didn't know what she was thinking, but I knew I had to be prepared for anything. This was no longer just a fight for Max. Jess was turning this into a war. When I got the news about Jess hiring that high-powered attorney, I admit I got nervous. I mean, this wasn't some simple disagreement anymore. It was turning into a full-on legal brawl. I didn't want things to get ugly, but if Jess was going to throw everything at me, I wasn't backing down. Mark, my lawyer, reassured me we were still in a good position. He had already gathered evidence to show I was Max's primary caretaker, and we had the receipts to prove it. A week later, we had our first hearing. Jess showed up looking more determined than I'd ever seen her. She didn't even make eye contact with me, which was weird because I thought we'd at least be civil. But the moment the hearing started, her lawyer came out swinging. They argued that Jess was emotionally attached to Max and that, during our relationship, she had been present at major milestones in his life, like when we adopted him and his first vet visit. They painted this picture like she had been a devoted dog mom, which couldn't be further from the truth. Then came the twist. Her lawyer claimed she had already bought a house with a big yard specifically for Max. My heart sank for a second. If that was true, it might sway the judge. Jess looked so smug as if she had this whole thing figured out. But Mark was ready. When it was our turn, he calmly presented the facts. He showed receipts from all the vet visits, food, grooming, and training classes I had paid for. He even presented a photo album with timestamps showing all the times I'd taken Max on walks, trips to the park, and playdates with other dogs without Jess in sight. What neither of us expected, though, was Jess's next move. Just when I thought Jess was done, she pulled out something I didn't see coming. Jess's lawyer claimed that I had been neglecting Max by leaving him with my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, when I traveled for work. Jess argued that Max would be better off with her full-time because she worked from home and could give him more attention. She said I was too busy and that I didn't deserve to keep him. I could feel my anger rising. Mrs. Thompson is like a second grandmother to Max. She's retired, lives 2 doors down, and loves having Max over. When I'd be gone for a few days, Max stayed with her. It wasn't neglect. It was Max getting spoiled with treats and belly rubs. Mark jumped in, pointing out that leaving Max with a trusted neighbor wasn't a sign of neglect but responsible pet ownership. He then showed the court a series of texts between Jess and me where she had declined to take care of Max when I asked her. Jess had never offered to help, and now she was trying to use it against me. But then, out of nowhere, Jess started crying. She claimed that the breakup had been too hard for her, and she wanted Max because he reminded her of the good times we had together. The emotional play caught me off guard. Was this all just about memories for her? It felt manipulative, and I wasn't sure if the judge was buying it or not. Then came another bombshell. Jess wasn't working from home after all. Mark had dug up some information that showed she had just started a new job, and it required her to travel frequently. Jess's face went pale when Mark brought up her new job. It was a job that involved a lot of travel, something she hadn't mentioned at all in court. She had painted this picture of being the perfect stay-at-home dog mom, but now it was clear that wasn't the case. Mark handed over documents that showed Jess had already been on 3 business trips in the last month alone. So much for being able to give Max all the attention she claimed. The judge looked visibly annoyed at the revelation. "Ms. Taylor," the judge said, "why did you not disclose this information earlier?" Jess stammered, trying to explain herself, but it was clear she was caught off guard. I didn't think it was relevant," she said. "I mean, I can always make arrangements for Max while I'm away, like you would have had to do every time you traveled," Mark interjected. "Which is the exact same thing my client has been doing, except he's upfront about it." I could see Jess squirming in her seat, realizing that her argument was crumbling. But then, she threw another curveball. "I've been working on getting a new apartment," she blurted out. "One with a big yard. Max will have so much more space with me than he ever did in your tiny apartment, Brian." My heart skipped a beat. I had no idea she was looking for a new place. Mark turned to me, raising an eyebrow, and I nodded, signaling I had no clue this was coming. But as soon as I saw her trying to play this new card, I knew she was desperate. Jess was scrambling to find something that could give her an edge, but the cracks in her story were becoming more and more obvious. And then Mark calmly dropped the final blow. "Your Honor, it's important to note that while Ms. Taylor may be considering moving, she's currently living in a pet-free apartment." The courtroom went silent. Jess's face flushed bright red as everyone processed what Mark had just said. A pet-free apartment? She had been fighting tooth and nail to keep Max, yet she couldn't even have him where she was living. It was the kind of irony you couldn't make up. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Is this true, Ms. Taylor? Are you currently living in a pet-free building?" Jess's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find the right words, but nothing came out. It was obvious she was caught. "It's just temporary," she finally blurted. "I'm moving out soon once I find the right place. Max won't be staying there long." Mark leaned in, keeping his calm composure. "Your Honor, the fact remains that, as of now, my client has provided a stable, pet-friendly home for Max. Meanwhile, Ms. Taylor has not only failed to mention her extensive travel schedule, but is currently unable to even legally house the dog." I couldn't help but feel a small surge of confidence. It was becoming clear that Jess was scrambling, and her case was falling apart. The judge took a deep breath, clearly not impressed by Jess's sudden backtracking. "This new information is concerning, Ms. Taylor," she said sternly. "It raises serious questions about your ability to provide a suitable environment for Max." Jess looked like she was on the verge of tears, but then she pulled one last trick out of her sleeve. "But, Your Honor," she said, her voice trembling, "Brian has been neglecting Max emotionally. He may have the physical space, but I was the one who was always there for Max, emotionally supporting him. He needs me." My heart sank. This was the emotional manipulation Jess had always been good at, and I could see it was working. The judge hesitated, seeming to consider her words. I knew Jess was good at playing the emotional card, but I didn't think she'd go that far. The judge looked like she was actually considering it, which made my stomach drop. I glanced over at my lawyer, who gave me a quick nod, as if to say, "Stay calm, we've got this." Mark stood up, ready to counter. "Your Honor," he said, in a calm but firm voice, "emotional support for an animal is important, but the physical care and well-being come first. Max has been living with Brian full-time for months. He's well-fed, healthy, and thriving. There's no evidence to suggest that Max is emotionally neglected, and Ms. Taylor's frequent absences only further demonstrate her inability to provide the stability Max needs." Jess jumped up before the judge could respond. "That's not true. Brian doesn't even care about Max. He only wants him to spite me." The judge raised her hand to silence Jess. "Ms. Taylor, please let Mr. Stevens continue," she said sternly. Jess slumped back down into her seat, her face red with frustration. Mark continued, "Your Honor, if Ms. Taylor was truly concerned about Max's emotional well-being, she would have taken action long before this court case. The fact is, she was content with the arrangement as long as it suited her lifestyle. Now that she's being asked to make sacrifices, she's using emotions as a last resort." Jess was shaking her head, but she stayed quiet this time. The judge sat back, clearly deep in thought. It felt like everything was balancing on the edge of a knife. And then Jess dropped a bombshell. "Your Honor, the truth is, I'm not the only one who's been seeing Max. I've had help from someone Brian knows well." Everyone froze. My heart raced. What was she talking about? The room was dead silent. Even the judge seemed caught off guard by Jess's sudden statement. My mind scrambled to figure out who she could be talking about. Someone I know? What the hell did she mean? Jess sat back, clearly savoring the moment. "You see, Your Honor, while Brian's been claiming he's the best person to care for Max, someone else has been stepping in to help me. Brian's own brother, Evan." I felt like I'd been sucker punched. Evan? My brother? No way. He wouldn't have done something like that behind my back. Would he? I glanced at him sitting behind me in the courtroom, but he avoided my gaze. My stomach dropped. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Taylor, are you saying Mr. Evan Sanders has been involved in the care of the dog without Mr. Brian Sanders' knowledge?" Jess smiled, enjoying the chaos she'd created. "Exactly. Evan's been helping me out with Max for months now. He's always had a soft spot for Max, and honestly, he agrees with me that Max should be with me. Brian's not the only one who's good with Max." I shot Evan a look, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Couldn't believe it. All this time, my own brother had been working against me, helping Jess. It felt like a betrayal on so many levels. The judge turned her attention to Evan. "Mr. Sanders, would you care to confirm this?" Evan finally stood, looking guilty as hell. "Your Honor, I've only helped out a few times when Jess needed someone to check on Max. I didn't think it was a big deal." "Did your brother know about this?" the judge asked. Evan hesitated, and that was all I needed to know. He hadn't told me a damn thing. I was furious. Jess had pulled this move out of nowhere, and now my own brother was involved. The judge's expression was unreadable, but I could tell this revelation had shifted the dynamic in the room. The judge looked between Jess and Evan, clearly processing the new information. I could feel the tension in the room, like everyone was holding their breath waiting to see what came next. Jess was smiling like she'd already won, but I wasn't ready to give up just yet. "Mr. Sanders," the judge said, turning to me, "it seems there's been some sort of misunderstanding or lack of communication about your dog's care. Would you like to respond to these claims?" I stood up slowly, my heart pounding. I took a deep breath before speaking. "Your Honor, I had no idea Evan was involved with the dog. He's my brother. I trusted him. I'm sure he was just trying to help, but I'm the one who's been there every single day for Max. I've taken him to the vet, fed him, played with him, and made sure he had everything he needed. Jess knows this." The judge nodded, but Jess cut me off, clearly eager to keep her narrative going. "That's the thing, Brian," she said. "You say you've done all this, but I don't see the proof. Evan's been a more consistent figure in Max's life recently, and it's been clear to me that he cares for the dog just as much as I do. Maybe more. I shot a look at Evan again, hoping he'd speak up and defend me. But instead, he remained silent, staring at his feet. The room felt like it was closing in on me. The betrayal of not only Jess but also Evan stung more than I could put into words. "I have vet records," I said, my voice a little shaky but firm. "I have pictures, receipts, and a list of dates showing when I've been with Max. And I've been the one paying for his medical care. I've spent thousands of dollars to make sure Max is healthy and happy." Jess raised an eyebrow. "That's all fine and dandy, Brian. But money doesn't make you a better pet parent. It's about consistency, care, and a stable environment. And I believe Max deserves more than what you've offered him recently." The judge looked back and forth between us, then glanced down at the case file. "We'll take a short recess," she said. "Please, don't make any decisions without consulting your legal representation." As the courtroom cleared out for the break, I stormed toward Evan, who was standing near the door. My hands clenched into fists, but I tried to stay calm. "Evan, what the hell, man? You've been helping her behind my back? You're supposed to be my brother. I thought you had my back." I spat, my voice barely controlled. Evan shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. "Brian, I didn't think it would go this far. Jess said it was just temporary. I didn't want to make things worse." "Worse? You're telling me this wasn't part of the plan?" I was beyond furious now, but Evan still wouldn't meet my gaze. The break was just long enough for me to cool off a bit, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just been blindsided by people I thought I could trust. Jess wasn't going to let this go without a fight, and now I had to figure out how to protect Max and my relationship with my brother. The break didn't last long, but long enough for me to cool down a bit. When I returned to the courtroom, I felt like I had a little more clarity in my head, but my heart was still racing. This wasn't just about the dog anymore. It was about family, trust, and betrayal. Jess was already seated, smiling like she had just won the lottery. I could tell she was trying to play the role of the victim in front of the judge, making it seem like I was the bad guy. She was good at that, and it made me sick. Evan, to my surprise, was now sitting on her side, which made my stomach churn. He wasn't just staying neutral, he was actively supporting her. I couldn't even look at him. The judge called the session to order and asked if we had anything to add before the final decision was made. I stood up, not knowing how much I could say at this point, but I wasn't about to back down. "Your Honor," I started, trying to stay calm. "I understand the importance of keeping Max's best interests in mind. I'm not here to fight Jess over custody. I'm here to make sure that the dog, who I've cared for years, stays in the home where he's loved, well cared for, and stable. And I think that's with me." Jess scoffed, clearly irritated. "Stability? Please. Brian, you've been busy with your new life. Max deserves more than just a part-time owner who can't even remember to pick him up from daycare." I shot her a look of disbelief. "Max is my priority. But when you took him without asking and then tried to make me look like a bad parent, that's where I draw the line." The judge didn't interrupt. She just watched and listened, weighing everything we were saying. I could feel the weight of every word. I wasn't going to lose this case, not when I had everything I needed to prove Max was better off with me. "I have documentation, Your Honor," I said, a little more firmly now. "I can show you the vet bills, the check-in logs, everything. Jess may have taken him for a few days, but I've always been there for Max. I'm his family, not just someone he sees every once in a while." Jess crossed her arms and rolled her eyes. "This isn't about a competition, Brian. But if you're going to be petty about it, sure, bring out your receipts. You've got nothing on me. I'm the one who's been looking out for Max's emotional needs." The judge nodded, clearly getting frustrated. "I've heard enough. We'll make our decision based on the evidence. But I encourage both of you to think about what's truly best for the dog." The tension in the room was unbearable as we all waited for the judge to make her final decision. I had a sinking feeling that Jess wasn't going to give up without a fight, but I was determined to make sure Max was going to stay where he belonged, with me. But little did I know, there was a twist in the story that would change everything. Something I hadn't expected at all was about to unfold in that courtroom. The judge excused herself to deliberate, and for what felt like an eternity, we all sat in tense silence. My eyes kept darting between Jess and Evan. I could tell Jess was trying to maintain her composure, but I saw the crack in her armor. She was nervous, no doubt about it. Finally, the judge returned, holding a piece of paper in her hand. The room fell quiet as she began to speak. I've reviewed all the evidence presented, and I've carefully considered what is in the best interest of the dog. However, there is something I need to address before proceeding. I leaned forward, trying to read her expression. Jess didn't seem to notice my focus, still looking like she was preparing her next argument. The judge paused, letting the room settle before she spoke again. "Brian," she began, "I understand your desire to keep Max with you. You've provided evidence of his care, and I can see that you love him very much. But I must point out that there is one thing that complicates this case. Jess has recently made a significant claim." My heart skipped a beat. What claim? What was she talking about? Jess finally seemed to notice the weight of the situation, her smug expression slowly fading. She glanced at her lawyer, but he just shrugged. I could feel the tension in the air thicken. The judge continued, her voice steady, but serious. "It seems that, in addition to the custody of the dog, there is a matter of financial responsibility that was not fully disclosed to the court." She turned her attention to Jess, her eyes narrowing. "Jess, you've been using Brian's credit card information to pay for expenses related to Max's care, and, potentially, other things during this dispute without his knowledge or permission." My jaw nearly hit the floor. "What? Was this a joke?" Jess's face turned pale. She stammered, clearly unprepared for the accusation. Wait, that's not what I—" But the judge cut her off. "I've reviewed the financial records provided, and it's clear that this is not just a misunderstanding. You've used Brian's account to pay for several things without his consent. This complicates your position in this case. Not only have you taken the dog without his permission, but you've also misused his financial resources in the process." Evan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly realizing the gravity of what was happening. I could feel the anger building inside me. This wasn't just a custody case anymore. It was a betrayal of the highest degree. The judge's next words hit me like a ton of bricks. "Brian, based on this information, I am awarding you full custody of Max, effective immediately." I was stunned. After everything that had happened, I never expected things to take this turn. Jess, once confident she would win, was now left speechless. Her entire plan had unraveled before her eyes. But what I didn't realize was that Jess had one more card to play, and it wasn't something I saw coming at all. I sat there in shock, still processing the judge's decision. I noticed Jess's lawyer shifting uncomfortably. I'd never seen him look so uneasy before. Jess, on the other hand, was frozen. Her face had gone completely white, her lips trembling slightly, but I wasn't sure if it was from anger or fear. Then, just as I thought it was all over, Jess spoke up in a quiet but firm voice. "I'm not done here." My stomach dropped. What was she going to do now? Her lawyer looked at her like she had just dropped a bomb, clearly not prepared for her to speak up after losing the case. "I know I've lost the custody of Max," Jess continued, now standing up. "But there's something I didn't tell you, something you should know about Brian." I could feel the room tense. The judge's eyes shifted between us, her expression unreadable. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice betraying the calm I was trying to hold on to. What new twist could she possibly have up her sleeve? Jess's eyes flickered toward Evan, who was still sitting silently beside her, watching the whole drama unfold. Then she dropped the bombshell. "It's not just about the dog," she said, her voice shaking a little. "Brian, he's been hiding something. He's been seeing someone else while we were still together. I have proof." The words hit me like a slap across the face. My mind immediately raced. What was she talking about? I hadn't been seeing anyone else. Sure, things had been rocky between us for months, but that wasn't how I handled it. I've been loyal. But Jess's accusation was explosive enough to change the whole narrative of the case. The room fell silent, the tension almost palpable. I could see the judge's eyebrows furrow as she turned her gaze back toward me. Evan shot me a look, and for the first time I saw a hint of sympathy in his eyes. Jess handed a piece of paper to her lawyer, who quickly handed it to the judge. The judge glanced over the paper, her face becoming more serious as she read. I felt the blood rush from my face. This wasn't part of the plan. I had no idea what kind of proof Jess had, but if it was even remotely believable, it could completely change everything. I tried to keep my composure, but I couldn't help but feel a rush of panic. "This is nonsense," I said, shaking my head. "I haven't been seeing anyone else." But Jess's smirk returned, the same smug expression from earlier now laced with a sense of triumph. I had no idea what was coming next, but I was about to find out, and it wasn't going to be easy. The judge's next words would either clear my name or confirm Jess's shocking claims. The judge held up the piece of paper, her eyes scanning it carefully, before glancing back at me. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice measured, "I need you to explain this." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as I looked at the paper in the judge's hand. Jess's lawyer leaned in closer, clearly eager to see how I'd respond. Evan, sitting quietly beside her, shot me a knowing look. I couldn't even fathom what this was all about. I had no idea what Jess had on me. I don't know what this is about," I stammered, trying to remain calm. "I haven't done anything wrong." Jess's lawyer spoke up, his voice smooth and confident. "This is a printout of text messages, Mr. Carter. They show that you were in contact with another woman while you were still living with Ms. Jess. It's clear that you've been dishonest." I looked over at Jess, who was sitting smugly with her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on me like a hawk waiting for me to crack. The accusation was shocking, but I knew it couldn't be true. I didn't have any other woman in my life. "I haven't been talking to anyone else," I protested, standing up now, my palms sweating. "That's not true. Those messages are fake. She's lying." But Jess's lawyer wasn't backing down. He placed another set of papers in front of the judge. "Here's a set of photos taken by a private investigator that clearly show Mr. Carter and this woman together in a cafe, acting cozy and leaving together." I froze. The photos showed me, or at least someone who looked like me. The woman with me didn't seem familiar, but the way the photos were taken and the timing of them were enough to make me question myself. The judge looked at me with a stern expression. "Do you recognize these photos, Mr. Carter?" I swallowed hard, feeling like the ground beneath me was slowly crumbling. How could this be happening? Why was Jess doing this? My mind was racing as I tried to think of a logical explanation, but nothing was coming to me. The evidence seemed overwhelming, and Jess was making sure everyone knew it. "This is ridiculous," I said, trying to steady my voice. "I've never seen this woman before in my life. I don't know what she's talking about." Jess's lawyer gave me a sly grin. "It seems you don't know much at all, Mr. Carter." The judge motioned for the room to settle down, and I felt my heart drop into my stomach. I wasn't just fighting for my dog anymore. This was getting personal. Jess was pulling out all the stops, and I was starting to realize she was much more calculated than I had given her credit for. "Mr. Carter," the judge said, looking up from the papers, "if you don't recognize the woman in these photos, then who is she? And why was she with you?" I glanced at Jess, who was still looking smug, watching me closely as if she knew I was on the verge of breaking. I could feel her satisfaction at seeing me squirm, and I hated it. I began, trying to find my footing. "I swear, I have no idea who this woman is. There's no way this is me." But just as I was about to speak further, something in me clicked. There was something about the photos that seemed off. I had never been to that cafe, not in the past few months at least. And then it hit me. Jess had been the one to encourage me to go to that cafe with her cousin, a woman she always told me was a friend. But was it possible that Jess had set me up? Had she orchestrated the whole thing to make it look like I was cheating? I turned to my lawyer, whispering urgently, "This is a setup. I'm sure of it. Jess is trying to make it look like I did something I didn't." My lawyer nodded, his face grim. "We'll figure this out. Don't worry. Stick to the truth, and we'll expose her lies." Just as things were getting more intense, the judge spoke again. "I think it's time we take a recess. Everyone take a break, and we'll reconvene in 15 minutes. I felt a rush of adrenaline. If this was truly a setup, I wasn't going to let Jess win. I had to fight for what was right, for the truth, and for my dog. The stakes were higher now, and I wasn't backing down. When the recess was called, I stepped out of the courtroom, trying to keep my cool. My lawyer was already by my side, reviewing the case notes. Jess stayed seated, smugly whispering with her attorney, clearly thinking she was in control. But I had a feeling that something was off. The photos, the woman I supposedly didn't know, the cafe I didn't remember visiting. This was all too convenient. It felt like Jess had been playing a long game, and I was just catching up. "We've got some leads on that woman in the photos," my lawyer said, pulling me aside. "We need to track her down, figure out who she really is. If she's someone Jess paid or manipulated, this could completely turn the case in our favor." I nodded. I had to get to the bottom of this. I couldn't let Jess twist the truth like this. Not only was she trying to take away my dog, but now she was trying to paint me as someone I wasn't. I'd had enough. We took a few minutes to strategize, and soon enough my lawyer was on the phone, pulling in some favors from a private investigator. We couldn't just rely on luck. We needed concrete proof to expose Jess's lies. The 15-minute break felt like hours, but finally, we returned to the courtroom. Jess seemed confident, but her smirk faded when the judge called the court to order. "Mr. Carter," the judge began, looking at me with a neutral expression. "We've reviewed the new information that's come forward. I understand you have something to present." I took a deep breath. Now was the time to turn the tables. I stood up, straightening my suit jacket. "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to submit new evidence that calls into question the credibility of these photos and the woman in them." I glanced at Jess, watching her face pale slightly as I slid a stack of documents across the table to the judge. These were photos and records showing that the woman in the cafe photos had been involved in multiple fake identity scams in the past. She was linked to a network of people who fabricated stories, making situations like this one seem plausible. Jess's lawyer immediately shot up. "Objection! This has nothing to do with the case at hand." But the judge raised a hand, signaling for silence. "I believe it does, Mr. Fields. If these new allegations are true, we'll need to look into them." Jess's face went ashen as she realized she was being exposed. I could see the panic behind her eyes. She had no idea I was already one step ahead of her. "Your Honor, I'd like to request a more thorough investigation into these photos and the woman involved," I said, my voice steady now. "I believe Jess has manipulated this situation to her advantage." Jess shot me an angry glare, but I wasn't intimidated. If she wanted to play dirty, then I was ready to fight fire with fire. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the judge called for a brief recess to review the new evidence. Jess was visibly shaking, her previous arrogance replaced with a flicker of fear. Her lawyer, normally calm and collected, was now scrambling through papers, trying to make sense of the unexpected turn of events. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. My lawyer leaned in and whispered, "We've got this. If this woman is involved in those scams, it's game over for her." I nodded, but I knew better than to get too cocky. There were still a lot of unknowns, and Jess was a master at playing dirty. But this was different. This wasn't just about who got the dog anymore. This was about exposing her lies and manipulation for everyone to see. When the judge returned to the bench, the room fell silent. He took his time flipping through the evidence I had submitted before looking up at both parties. Jess, still trying to hold her composure, glanced nervously at her lawyer. After careful review, the judge began, his voice firm. "I believe there are serious questions about the authenticity of the evidence presented by Mrs. Jacobs. These new developments are troubling, and I am ordering a full investigation into the claims made against her and the individuals involved." Jess's lawyer tried to object, but the judge quickly cut him off. "This is no longer a simple custody dispute. We need to uncover the truth about these fabricated stories and the individuals involved." I could see Jess's face turning pale. She was done. Her game was up. The judge continued, "Until the investigation is complete, I am suspending any decisions regarding the custody of the dog. We will reconvene once all facts are clarified." With that, the court session was adjourned, and I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. But I knew this wasn't over. Jess wasn't going to give up easily. But now she had nowhere to hide. She had been caught red-handed, and I was determined to see this through to the end. As I left the courthouse, I couldn't help but feel a sense of victory. It wasn't just about getting my dog back anymore. It was about standing up for what was right and making sure Jess didn't get away with using manipulation and deceit to get what she wanted. I didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. I wasn't backing down. I had the truth on my side, and that was something Jess could never take away from me. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind. Jess's lawyer had already made a few attempts to reach out, offering settlements, but I wasn't interested in playing her game anymore. I wasn't about to let her get away with everything she tried to pull. The investigation into her actions continued, and every day brought new twists. The media caught wind of the case, and before I knew it, my story was plastered all over local news. I had never expected it to gain so much attention, but in some ways it helped. The public pressure on Jess mounted, and with it, her already shaky facade crumbled even more. Months later, the investigation finally wrapped up. Jess was facing criminal charges related to her fraudulent activities and attempts to manipulate me into giving her what she wanted. The courts ruled that she had not only violated trust but had also attempted to sabotage the legal process with false documents. The judge made a final ruling. The dog was mine, and Jess was ordered to pay for legal fees and damages. It wasn't just about the dog anymore, though. It was about justice. Jess had thought she could get away with anything. She had thought that she could use the law to her advantage and walk away unscathed. But in the end, it wasn't her manipulation that won. It was the truth. I was awarded full custody of the dog, and Jess was left to face the consequences of her actions. As for me, I moved on with my life. The stress of the legal battle had taken its toll, but I was finally free from her control. In the end, I realized the whole experience taught me a valuable lesson. Trusting someone is easy, but knowing when to stand up for yourself and what you believe in is what truly matters. Jess had tried to make me a pawn in her game, but instead, I became the one who took control. And that's how I took my ex to court over our dog, and won.